At the time of its release, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 was regarded as easily the most confusing entry in the series up to that point. And even to this day, nearly a decade later, there are still mysteries and questions the general community can't fully agree on the answers for. Who do we play as during the night sections? What are the implications of the empty girls' room? And of course, what was in the box? But the main question I'm going to attempt to tackle today is this: who is the Fredbear Plush? The mysterious teleporting toy that seems to be a friend to the crying child. As the years have gone by, theories about what it is or who may be speaking through it have only grown. Is it an actual entity or person, or could it literally just be an imaginary friend? That was the question I wanted to answer today, and I think I do have an answer. But while I was putting this theory together, I realized it was becoming far bigger than I had initially planned. Questions about the timeline as a whole were suddenly becoming clear, and that's what I'm going to cover today. This is how the Fredbear Plush solved the FNAF timeline. Mostly. As I said before, the Fredbear Plush was introduced in FNAF 4 as the crying child's seemingly imaginary friend, guiding him and trying to help him cope with his fears, such as the animatronics at Fredbear's or his older brother hiding and scaring him with a foxy mask. But as the game went on, it seemed more and more likely that it wasn't just an imaginary friend. It would appear in strange places, teleporting and following crying child around town. And after the bite, it very much seemed to talk as a real entity, promising to put him back together. Back then, we had very little to work with as far as who the Fredbear Plush could be. It was essentially split between two options. Either it was all in Crying Child's head as an imaginary friend, or it was possessed by something. With it being an imaginary friend, you can easily write everything off, but it does feel a little bit strange and unsatisfying, especially with the final minigame. So let's look at the possessed option. The fact we were so early in the timeline, though even that was debated at the time, made it very hard to say it was possessed by something. Besides, maybe the kid from Save Him due to that being theorized to be Fredbear's. There were arguments that maybe murders besides that were already happening, many pointing to the crumpled suit on Night 4's minigame with brown tufts of something coming out of the neck. And it has been argued that it's the hair of a murder or spring lock failure victim. Quickly, I disregard the spring lock failure because if it was an adult, then their entire head would be visible, and I don't think suit stuffing murders happened until the MCI. It may have been an MCI victim, but later that same year, the Silver Eyes would release, putting that event in 1985, 2 years later than the setting of the minigames. You can say that wasn't confirmed for the games and still hasn't been, but the fact that 1985 has continued to stay consistent in Fazbear Frights makes me think that this was already firmly the year Scott had decided to place the MCI when FNAF 3 and 4 were being made. I think it's just fur and wires, an ironic example of something being misinterpreted by the in-game protagonist and the audience. So we had options for the plush, but neither felt really satisfying. Maybe the empty girl's room is meant to be a hint as to what's going on. It's his sister or something possessing the plush, and that would be the one retcon. But frankly, this is a big issue with FNAF 4 in general. It was needlessly vague to the point where we wouldn't get that Mike was Foxy Bro until sister location in the logbook. But anyway, side tangent aside, we would get more to work with when FNAF World came out. The Fredbear Plush would make their return as Glitch Bear, and guide us as the player to find a series of clocks and place breadcrumbs for him to find their way. And as we play through the clocks, it becomes very apparent what we're doing. Him is Crying Child, and with the clocks, we're setting up the minigames from FNAF 3. Things were making more sense, such as why the minigames weirdly parallel the ones in FNAF 4. And it was abundantly clear now that there was definitely some sort of entity or person behind the plush. But Glitch Bear in this game seems to be different than how they talk to Crying Child. More assertive, even manipulative. Come to think of it, looking back at FNAF 4, they even seem to be kind of manipulative then. Given Scott's hint, what is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood by the mind of a child. We can assume the thing that made Crying Child so scared wasn't an actual threat, yet the plush encourages his fear. Strange. So, things are making more sense as far as the role of the Fredbear Plush and why the Crying Child was important, but it still wasn't clear what exactly the plush was. Not until Sister Location. We encounter the plush this time as a real 3D object in the fake ending route, finding it in a private office that seems to be a monitoring station of some sort of the FNAF 4 gameplay room. The camera displays in conjunction with the breaker map of the entire facility leads to a pretty nuts conclusion, but one that seems to be proven more true as the years go by. FNAF 4 was a test of some sort. Of what exactly was pretty unclear. At the time, people settled on it being a monitoring station for Crying Child, but the tale story Didophobia makes it explicitly clear that the bedroom in FNAF 4 is not a real bedroom. It is just another area underground in Sister Location. We don't see the other areas shown on the breaker map in the story, but it's very likely that those are also fake too. Not that the town with Fredbear's isn't real, it's just that that area on the map is a recreation. With the bedroom not actually being in a real house, it explains it not matching the one seen in the minigame. The room may even be a recreation of Mike's room. Didophobia gives us even more to work with because it tells us exactly what the test is for. It's experimenting with fear. The core 4 nightmares are there as mannequins, but look monstrous due to gas being pumped into the room from sister location. Gas cans we can see in the actual game. And in probably the best moment in the story, when the main character, Rory, is attempting to escape from the chamber after realizing what's going on, he hears a voice coming from somewhere. The voice convinces him to set up the experiment again, and Rory does. He returns to the nightmare, but for us, it's revealed that the voice was simply a recording, preset to play any time Rory tries to leave. So that's a lot, and I may have seemed to just go on a tangent, but all of that's very important to be aware of, especially the last bit. Remember the Fredbear Plush in the private room? Right in its lap, it's holding a radio or speaker of some sort. And everything clicks. Whoever is running these tests, whoever made the sister location facility, whoever would know their children's rooms in town, able to recreate it down to the wallpaper and toys, is speaking through the plush. The Fredbear Plush is William Afton. Yeah, every FNAF fan already knows this theory, but my dad watches these videos and I like to give context. But seriously, I actually have a lot more to add on to this. And I wanted to finally dispel some conclusions theorists work with as simply fact. The breaker room map does not mean that sister location is right next to Fredbear's, or the Afton home. What is shown on the map is literally there, adjoining rooms in the facility. Does this mean that what we see in FNAF 4's minigames are simply fake then? I don't think so, I believe those are mostly real.
Wait, what do you mean mostly?
We'll get there. And as far as when exactly William is speaking through the plush, I do believe that every time we see them talk in FNAF 4, it is William. I know people are going to scream at me in the comments about the whole final speaker debate, but I seriously think that the different color text was an accident. It is such a minuscule difference and it's shared with another random side character in the game. Whoever is talking is the same the entire time, and I think Ultimate Custom Night actually gives really strong evidence for William to be at least the final speaker.
We know who our friends are. And you are not one of them.
I haven't seen anyone talk about that as serious evidence, but Ultimate Custom Night is William's actions all being thrown back in his face. This makes sense if he had once claimed to be a friend. And with the tape recorder explanation that Didophobia gives us, it explains how the plush can talk while William's on screen or at work. Somehow it's set to trigger lines when certain criteria are met, like maybe passing a table, or even William is using preset audio prompts on the device we see in the plushie's lap. And other times it could be William talking, like at home. I also believe that Glitch Bear is William manipulating the player, who I believe is Cassidy and the Yellow Eyes, to experiment on Crying Child, his guinea pig. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, but shout out to Seth Sadie's Putting the Pieces Together video for finally convincing me that Glitch Bear is William. I'll link it in the description, give it a watch, seriously it's great. Anyway, I think William does initially want to put Crying Child back together, but in his own way. Being put back together is reforming one's memories and identity, and in a sense, William may get this, but I don't think he fully understands. I believe he perceives it as full revival. From his perspective, Elizabeth was close to this. She had a full body and was mostly intact, but Mike had to go down and finish the job for unspecified reasons. We know that from the fourth closet he believes transferring bodies is an equivalent to immortality. He planned to do that with himself, but for some reason he never succeeded with Crying Child in the games. Perhaps he got repurposed in some other way after having a better candidate with Elizabeth. So, the Fredbear Plush was an early experiment he was testing with the Crying Child. But the main question is, well, why? If you follow my previous videos, you know that my order of events has Crying Child be bitten before Charlie dies. William has literally no reason to be doing any of this. Well, as much as it pains me, because that video did really well, I'm unfortunately going to have to rearrange how I place things in that video. I still believe all the characterizations I put there are who they are, and their motives are mostly the same. But the main thing is William does not kill Charlie in response to the bite. William post Charlie's death, no matter if Crying Child or Charlie dies first, always experiments with fear first, before doing more kidnapping and murder. I put the bite of 83 before her death due to it just being the more narratively satisfying option. But looking at it objectively, both events can be switched for different reasons. It could be the way I had it, the bite happens and then the security puppet's installed as a protective caution. Or the security puppet already existed and is temporarily decommissioned and moved to Freddy's post Charlie's death, so not in Fredbear's by the time of FNAF 4. There are reasons to have both happen first, but if I have to be objective, William did not have a narratively satisfying reason to kill Charlie in the Silver Eyes. He did it simply to hurt Henry because his pride and ego couldn't take Henry being potentially better than him. He doesn't have an inciting incident to do it, he's just a monster. His reason for exploring the spirits and immortality stems from seeing that Henry has brought Charlie back somehow. Could this logic be followed in the games? Absolutely. The main thing is I am very sure both events in the games need to take place at the same building. So the logic follows that a murder would be more likely to close the building than the bite incident, just following the trend of the other locations. But another explanation could just be that the other locations had multiple murders versus this one is just one. And the bite could be blamed on the restaurant more than a random murder that happened to be outside of it, forcing it to close. And now he suddenly has a reason to be in his early stages of testing, eventually making the test rooms based on Crying Child's real nightmares. I'm still sticking by that. I don't think he was ever in the test chambers. So we've gone over a lot, and honestly I could probably wrap the video here, but there is still one thing I need to elaborate on. What did I mean by the mini-games in FNAF 4 are mostly real? Well, if I'm going to answer that, I think it's about time that I give a mostly fleshed out timeline of the first phase of FNAF, recapping everything I've theorized about up to this point and much, much more. So, strap in. We're going to begin in the late 1970s, with William Afton and Henry starting Fredbear's Family Diner. This sprite here, yep, we're going to say that's Fredbear. So, with establishing that, the restaurant would have three animatronics, Fredbear, Bonnie, and the puppet. I actually believe this is what the paper pals were meant to apply in FNAF 2. We have three characters grouped together, a bear, a rabbit, and a humanoid figure with three buttons and a wide smile. It is important to point out it could also be meant to imply Balloon Boy with the red and blue and the nose, but I believe both interpretations to be valid. The restaurant would be a success and continue for the following years until they got big enough to form Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated. But before we get there, I'm going to pause for a minute. If we're going to be placing Charlie's death before the bite of 83, I think it makes a lot of sense to say that it's also before the opening of Freddy's. Henry, in grief, would throw himself into work, going fully in on Freddy's, and would leave William to mostly tend to Fredbear's on his own. They would still work together and visit each other's locations, but this makes sense with William's track record of having a secondary location to Freddy's, like starting Circus Babies later. So, William and Henry would work together for years at Fredbear's, and William's obsessions, admirations, and disdain would grow of Henry while at the same time learning as much as he can about the technological from him. Eventually, it would boil over. Perhaps he thinks it's finally time to take his place as the better of the two. He would kill Charlie one night in the back alley while Henry was busy inside, perhaps even wearing the Fredbear suit performing. William would get away and the security puppet would collapse on Charlie in the rain, the first possession, a wound first inflicted on Henry. After this, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza launches in 1983, as Fredbear's is folded in under the larger Fazbear umbrella. But one day while visiting Freddy's, he notices the puppet is different. Thinking. Almost with a will of its own. He would connect the dots and realize Charlie has possessed the puppet, and he knew he would have to try to replicate it. Charlie was terrified before he killed her, so he would start there, and what better candidate to test on than his own kid? All of his kids were just assets to him anyhow, tools to maintain a good image. He owned them. They were literally his creations. As I've said before in previous videos, Crying Child's fears would stem from seeing people being suited up and also playground gossip. But with this narrative, we can also add the death of Charlie. A child found dead next to one of the mascots would absolutely be talked about. Not that Crying Child saw this himself or anything, just rumors. William would modify his son's plush to allow him to speak through it or play recordings. Like I said, I think there is a good chance that there were cameras in the home, but while at work he could simply play a recording out of the plush from a handheld device, like a soundboard. His son was already afraid, he was just growing what was already there. Michael had unknowingly helped William's plan with his bullying. Crying Child would have horrific nightmares, and of course he would tell his dad about it, or even confide in the plush, his friend. William would work on the test rooms based on his son's dreams in his bunker, which I think actually has a good chance of existing previously as just a place William would go to tinker and practice on his creations. William would continue working and testing. He would have had Crying Child go through the chambers to make sure they worked as intended before eventually finding a way to take more children to test and kill. He knew it would have to come to that eventually. It was almost his duty to recreate what he witnessed with Charlie, but he needed to do it differently, in a way where he could control it almost completely. He hadn't intended to make Charlie, and he couldn't control her. But before he could put Crying Child in, the bite of 83 happens. A mix of poor supervision and faulty machinery. And it was all Michael's fault. He had ruined his asset, and it completely embarrassed him. Fredbear's would close for good after this, and the suits would be moved to Freddy's. Crying Child would be put in a coma and soon die, but as he does, William keeps up the facade of the Fredbear Plush. If he ever had the chance in the future to still use Crying Child somehow, he needed him to still think that William was his friend, this plush. He would put him back together, revive him as Charlie had done for herself, and it would be something he could control. William would watch Crying Child die, and the Fredbear Plush's eyes light up. That's right, I believe the Crying Child possesses the Fredbear Plush, and I still think it's there by the time we get to Sister Location. Now, there's no solid evidence of this, but I think once William knows that the plush is possessed, there's a good chance William would work on the plush to try to transfer its soul into other vessels, maybe the heads we see in the control module during Sister Location. But it doesn't work. William can't do it, and that's a major character thing for him that I want to address. There are no human-robot recreations of Crying Child or multiple Vanessas down the line because only Henry was able to do that for Charlie in The Silver Eyes, because he loved her and genuinely grieved for her. You can create life if you care so deeply or feel so strongly, but William isn't able to do it. That's the point of the fourth closet and why he needs the Ella doll. Anyway, it doesn't work, so he sets it aside for now. Since the bite, he's had Michael going through the nightmare tests, and it's gone well. He believes them to be real monsters. So William flushes out his plan to get kids for the test. Enter Circus Baby's Pizza World. The fun times are made to capture for his tests, but on day one of Baby's opening, his third child, Elizabeth, dies due to Baby herself. Perhaps the stomach hatch was too tight and she suffocated, or perhaps Baby in particular was meant to kill. Elizabeth dies inside of her, and more importantly, possesses her. William has a successful test. However, Elizabeth's death is still something he has to cover up. The owner's daughter can't just disappear. It's not like a random parent with a missing kid, it can't be ignored, so a new plan's made. And well, I'll let older me fill in the rest of this.
Publicly, Circus Baby's closes due to the gas leaks, but internally for Fazbear's, it's blamed on a spring lock accident. William blames spring locks to cover up the actual purpose of the fun times, and temporarily has to retire them to his facility. At Freddy's,
after learning of an unfortunate incident at the sister location involving multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures, the company has deemed the suit temporarily unfit for employees. Safety is top priority at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which is why the classic suits are being retired to an appropriate location while being looked at by our technicians.
Now, just a note, I'm not saying that Circus Baby herself is a spring lock animatronic. I'm just saying that William blames spring locks on her death. He might have even blamed the suit we wear in Night 4 of Sister Location.
He has Elizabeth. It worked. The inconsistent results between Crying Child and Charlie's possessions are a non-issue anymore. He knows how to replicate it. The victims have to be inside of the vessels, inside of them for consistent results. He wanted to do another test, but he couldn't justify another restaurant under him, so he would turn to Freddy's. And I don't think it was a desperate move, maybe ill-conceived, but not random. Despite the successful tests, he is angry at Henry once again. Somehow, William has gone down 2 children and 2 restaurants, while Henry continues to succeed with Freddy's. Sure, they worked together and were involved in each other's projects. They both were ultimately still the founders, while William did his side projects. But Henry somehow hadn't broken. He had continued to live. William would take the last thing he had and get away with it. He would plan it out, picking the targets carefully. And here's where we're going to pause again, because now it's finally time for me to address Midnight Motorist. I believe it is the same night of the MCI, and it's showing another victim of that event, specifically Gabriel. No joke, this was going to be my first theory video I ever did on the channel before doing Sister Location. What if I told you there was a direct connection between this minigame and Fruity Maze? Let's take a closer look. In Fruity Maze, as you play, the collectibles become glitched with the addition of a dead dog and a yellow burrowing rabbit. A rabbit in a dirt pile in a minigame with a dead dog that would need to be buried. The dirt pile is where Susie's dog is buried. I don't necessarily use later that night from the game files as solid evidence. I think it's just saying later after the racing section. But if you want to give it meaning, then it's later the night of the MCI or Fruity Maze, not Security Puppet. There is a minor issue of Susie in the fourth closet saying that their dad knows the dog got hit, but this could just be an only book thing. Either way, William is responsible for its death and it being out there in some way. Toy Chica the high school years backs this up as being MCI related even more, with Toy Chica standing in as a parallel for William, going to her victim's house and stating she'll find a window. More evidence that Midnight Motorist is an MCI victim is actually in FNAF 3. Phantom Chica appears in an arcade machine, just like how we see Susie show up in Fruity Maze, and Phantom Freddy appears behind a window. In FNAF 3, of course, Springtrap also shows up on that side of the glass, but in Help Wanted, it's flipped. In Pizza Party, Springtrap is on the other side of the glass, and you start in a bedroom, being lured to Freddy's and eventually being stuffed into Freddy himself. I even think that's a major reason Scrap Trap exists, to give him matching feet to the footprints outside the window to get us to connect it to William. The rest of Midnight Motorist is just set dressing, giving backstory and an example of the kind of kid William would single out if he sees him frequently at the restaurant. Same for Susie. He knows in advance her dog is dead, and is able to use that to lure her. The MCI wasn't random. He watched and picked each one until they were all together, but he's willing to go out of his way if he needs to, like with Midnight Motorist. The one person that may not have been pre-selected is Cassidy. I would like to point out how in the games, the children that are a part of the MCI all match the gender of their assigned character, except for Cassidy. I'm not including Charlie or the puppet in this because their possession wasn't intentional, but Cassidy is weirdly out of place. And I think that's what Toy Chica the high school years is saying about the last boy she's interested in. It was more random, maybe even more violent, just a side thought of, I do still have this Fredbear suit I can still use, might as well. Now, with that incredibly long pause out of the way, let's keep going. William would don his suit, Bonnie, the yellow rabbit, and over the day and into the night, lure and kill his targets in the safe room. Initially, 2 are reported, but finally the number would total to 5. Everything's in chaos, and nobody can find the kids stuffed into the animatronics on stage. William's done it. He's ruined Freddy's and has his tests. Unfortunately for him, the cops in this universe actually managed to do a semi-decent job and pick out him as the prime suspect of the kidnappings. The cops don't find the bodies though because the story needs to happen. William is suspected but isn't charged, and he is now effectively blacklisted from all Fazbear-related locations, including Afton Robotics. Fazbear's tries to save face and seal the safe room now with the yellow rabbit inside, and William leaves without being able to verify his work, not to be seen again, until 2 years later. Real quick, I'm going to pause here again because previously I've stated that Fazbear Entertainment starts Circus Baby's entertainment and rental post the MCI closing at Freddy's. However, I'm going to point to Didophobia again. In the story, Rory comes to the conclusion that he's been in this automated test for at least 10 years, and if the tests roughly started in 1983, then the story is set in 1993. Very close to FNAF 1. Even if you don't think the story is in continuity, I think it tells us something very important. I think it's telling us that the facility was just completely abandoned, at least after 1985. And this allows the closure of FNAF 1 to be the restaurant hand unit was referring to on night 1. Even more importantly, it gives us a huge window of time for William to be sneaking back in and out of the facility, to even do Molted MCI and have time for the animatronics to have attempted to escape before, as entered references on night 5. Okay, and now we've pretty much recapped and connected what I've done in these 2 videos, but I still haven't answered the question. How are the FNAF 4 minigames mostly real, and how does Glitch Bear tie into this? Trust me, we're very close, but real quick we're going to flash back to 1985 again. I believe that due to the kids not actually dying in the suits and being stuffed post-death, it essentially hides the bodies from them, and they would wander for a while. Cassidy may be an exception, but I'm not aiming to answer absolutely everything today. I gotta save some topics for later. Charlie, as the puppet, would guide the kids to find themselves and take control of the animatronics, becoming their guardian. I do have to credit Rye Toast for seeding that idea in my head with this video, because it just feels right. So this is what Give Gifts, Give Life is, but I'd actually go as far as to say this is what the dreams of FNAF 2 also are. Whoever is actually having the dreams, I can't say for certain, but I think that wearing the mask in FNAF 2 is what is giving us dreams. Speaking of FNAF 2, let's finally get to 1987. Introducing the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Big rebrand, super kid friendly, robots tied to a criminal database, and no bodies in them. Wait, what happened to the bodies? Well, surprise surprise, William is back and undercover bossing it as a night guard. It's unclear exactly what happened to the bodies of the MCI post-stuffing, and I honestly wouldn't put it past Fazbear Entertainment to just cover it up and throw the corpses out. Or William came in as a night guard earlier than we thought and just took the bodies out before any maintenance people could work on the animatronics, initially trying to retrofit them and then eventually repurposing them for just parts. The Silver Eyes does give credence to the idea of a guard being hired for an unfinished building like the mall, so it's a valid option. However, in my opinion, William's main reason for coming back is to see the results of his work. What happened to the original animatronics? Did the possession work? And now we get into trying to explain the DCI, or Dead Children incident. I think William kills them either due to not believing the original animatronics became possessed, so he's trying again, or it's to try to ruin Freddy's again, if Henry is still somehow in charge. I really do like the idea that the corpses we see are teens that did try to break in. Once again, Silver Eyes gives us the idea of something like that happening. But the truth is, we really have nothing concrete to go off of. Maybe they're kidnapped kids from around town, maybe they're teens. The point is, they're not adults and they're dead. And the puppet activates. It's happening again. It can't happen again. So she enlists Freddy's help and tries to stop him, to save them. But it's too late. They can't. Save them is showing the aftermath of the killing, but how does the whole event actually play out? We know William typically likes to wear a costume for this kind of thing, but currently the spring Bonnie suit is sealed behind a wall in the safe room. So there's only one suit to wear. I believe William wears the Fredbear suit, corrupting it, and in turn, Cassidy. From this spawns Shadow Freddy, a reflection of William's wickedness with the form of Fredbear, lingering as a footprint for the weeks after the event, but also forming at crucial moments such as later on in Follow Me. But I do have to credit and Tom. I disagree with a few things they say in the video, but I think they really nailed that connection. Jumping back to Fredbear, remember that phone guy says they had a suit in the back. I think from this point on, Fredbear is no longer a physical suit, only appearing as a ghost because William takes it after the DCI. That's why we don't see it in FNAF 2's parts and service. So, for the time being, William has to run off again, taking Fredbear and leaving Cassidy no choice but to appear as a ghost, a reflection of whatever version of Freddy is there, a golden Freddy. Now, this still does leave the DCI and the toys. I personally believe that the toys are paranormal because they use parts from the original animatronics, so it just carried over. And this also factors into how Golden Freddy can still appear despite being taken. Some parts of them are still there in some capacity. But that's not all. There is also precedence for souls leaving the pizzerias and animatronics they inhabit. They may be tied to the locations and ultimately have to return, but they can roam. There's plenty of examples in the movie, but especially with Golden Freddy straight up going to get Abby. And we have evidence of this from Fazbear Frights with Coming Home. Susie at the end of that story ultimately does have to leave her home, but the idea is there. This next bit I'm less sure on, but I think Shadow Bonnie spawns from the DCI. All the agony built up from the original MCI, William killing more, and on top of that using a suit that once housed a corpse of one of his victims, compounding on one another until we get this new creature, based on the toy animatronics due to the location, but a rabbit reflecting the identity of their killer. The DCI victims can ultimately just move on, but this entity remains, and the puppet is able to work with it. I really don't have details for this or have it too fleshed out, it's all spiritual mumbo-jumbo. But it's clear through Happiest Day and Special Delivery that Shadow Bonnie is not inherently evil or antagonistic. They spawn when something strongly negative is occurring. Frankly, I need to look at it more because they are just straight up weird, but this is what I have so far. So, FNAF 2 closes, the toys are scrapped, unclear what happens to them, but maybe their parts are repurposed, and Fazbear's tries to downsize as a last-ditch effort, going back to the first building and trying to do with the originals one more time. Where the puppet actually goes from here until FNAF 3 and 6 is really unclear, and I don't really see anybody ever talking about it, and I don't have a good answer either. But I may have an answer as to what William is doing with the Fredbear suit on the side. At this point, William now knows that the animatronics are possessed. He's succeeded, but the puppet turned them against him. I think that's a key continuity difference between everything. If the puppet is there first, they become antagonistic to William. If William gets to them and the puppet doesn't, or even just doesn't exist at all, William becomes more in control of them. In the Silver Eyes trilogy, this is very apparent. And even though I'm guessing there will be a puppet in the next movie, for some reason it doesn't reach the kids first. So jumping back to the games, William needs to change this. He had planned on putting Crying Child and Elizabeth back together, but Elizabeth is simply a far better and easier candidate to work on, so he will focus on her later. I believe there is a chance he did split Elizabeth up between the other fun times, doing this to test taking apart and putting back together one's identity, perhaps to better understand what to do with Crying Child. But never got around to putting her back together fully. At the moment, however, he needs to prioritize the MCI victims, trap them, and try to control them. He would turn one of their own against them and trick them, and thus, FNAF World happens. William takes the persona of Glitchbear to manipulate Cassidy, the player, to place breadcrumbs for Crying Child to help him find his way. Find his way to the MCI, and vice versa. His son trusts him, so in theory, binding the souls of the others with him would help him gain some sort of control. Cassidy would appear to the Crying Child as Yellow Eyes, the first time Crying Child has been able to see anything in a long time. At this point, Cassidy is still being manipulated by William, but she acknowledges that this is a spirit that needs help, and she goes along with what William is influencing. It may not help anybody now, but eventually it will. William thinks he has what he wants, but in truth he's just given Cassidy key information about himself and a way to eventually set the rest of her group free. I think to better understand Crying Child, even if he doesn't remember much, Cassidy was able to look at the memories tied to the Fredbear Plush in Crying Child. I believe the FNAF 4 minigames are Cassidy watching the memories of the last week of Crying Child's life. That gives us a very good reason for it to appear more paranormal in the game, because it is, just not at the time. And now Cassidy knows not to trust William, the plush speaker. She can see right through it. This may seem out of left field, but actually pause to think about it. At this point, a lot of people agree that Mike going through some form of the real nightmares once and then later on during FNAF 1 having memories of the nightmares is probably what's going on, with the actual gameplay we see being the latter. This would be the exact same thing, but for Cassidy and Crying Child, both viewing skewed versions of events from 1983, nearly a decade later. Because I think while all of this is happening with William, Mike is currently working at FNAF 1, less under the thumb of William and trying to figure out what's going on. That would also be why Golden Freddy is far more rare now. They aren't there in the same capacity anymore. So having both the minigames and the gameplay of FNAF 4 being looking back at old events explains a lot and thematically works super neatly. But super quickly, let me just try to explain how all this stuff with World is even happening. Firstly, I think William is sneaking back into his old facility to do a lot of this, and once again it's spiritual mumbo jumbo. I don't even feel bad using that as an explanation because this is literally a line from William in the fourth closet. Maybe we just need some new life in this mass of metal. You'll have to forgive me though, as I'm not quite sure how to do that either. I can think of a few things to try. At the very least it'll be fun, like old times. Yeah, I read that right. Am I saying that William, while having some decent technical know-how, is ultimately just an egotistical lucky idiot that thinks he understands spirits? Abso-freaking-lutely. He's just trying stuff. So he tries this thinking it may work, and Cassidy allows it to happen because ultimately it will help them in the long run. But he thinks it works for now, so now that he's done with Fredbear, he could melt them down first and distribute them between the fun times, or just scrap it. Once again, unclear. So, I've done it. I've explained how I think the FNAF 4 minigames are mostly real. Cool. I think from here the rest of the series kind of falls into place. Mike gets fired from Freddy's and it closes. Follow Me happens. It's an old building and William probably takes the wall down to the safe room. Once again, Shadow Freddy spawns because Cassidy wants the others to follow William, and William thinks he can control them and wants them to follow him. He dismantles them and puts the 4 endos into an automated furnace that will melt them into molten remnant to be dispersed between the Funtime animatronics via the scooper. He can't see it through himself because maybe Fazbear's is now starting Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, and William can't sneak in anymore. Mike and William would talk. Perhaps Mike is confronting William about Freddy's. William promises answers if he goes to Circus Baby's when the job becomes available, and tells Mike his sister is down there, and he can put her back together. Mike would leave until he can go down there, and William would go get his yellow rabbit suit. William is confronted with the spirits, and he freaks out and puts on the suit to try to trick them. Of course, it doesn't work. Cassidy would see right through it, and the spring locks go off, turning William into Springtrap. The spirits would fade away as they need to return to Circus Babies. Henry may also return here and seal the wall, trapping Springtrap. Soon after, Mike would go down to Sister location, and the Fun Times think he's William and scoop him, but Baby promises he won't die. She knows how the scooper works. She doesn't want to kill him because she thinks it's her dad. Mike stays alive due to the remnant in the scooper. All the Funtime animatronics merge, becoming Ennard, and they wear Mike out. Quite literally. He throws Ennard up about a week later, but now Elizabeth has been reformed and she splits off from the MCI kids. Oh, also Yendo is Golden Freddy. Although Rotted Purple Mike fan art is cool, I actually think that there's a good chance he fully heals after this. I think he goes back to the bunker at some point and finds the private room and the plush. He takes it and sees what William has been doing. This, mixed with the fact that the animatronics specifically thought it was William, and they were mad enough to do what they did, he puts together that William was responsible for everything, vowing to find him. Him taking the plush and seeing the test rooms isn't needed, by the way. I just think it's a cool detail that I kind of like to put in my headcanon. Years would go by, the logbook in FNAF 3 would happen. Springtrap is freed, Frights burns down, the puppet was maybe there? Ultimately, the bad ending is what happens here. And now we have all our key players set up for FNAF 6. William, Scrap Baby, the puppet and Lefty, and the rest of the spirits in Molten Freddy are all called the FNAF 6. Baby thinks that William is behind the restaurant, and William knows it's a trap but goes out of curiosity and ego. Mike becomes the restaurant manager, Henry gives an epic speech, and everyone burns. The end. Except not yet. Charlie has heard what her father said. It's time to rest, and she agrees. With Cassidy's assistance, they work together and use all the pieces previously set up from Crying Child's broken memories to make that terrible party into a good one. What it should have been. A happiest day. For all of them. Crying Child now gets the party he deserved, with all of his friends. Crying Child receives his own mask, and he and the other 4 pass on. Charlie stays for a while. She needs to check on Cassidy, and she finds something terrible. William is still alive. Just barely, but still. Cassidy's goal has always been to ultimately kill William. That is the role of Golden Freddy in every continuity. In the Silver Eyes trilogy, they gladly ended William. And in the film, Golden Freddy doesn't stick around to keep William alive. Quite literally the opposite, closing the door on him to let him die. They are fine with ending it, but there is another entity here that won't let it happen. Andrew. Charlie can't do much currently. Eventually, after the fire, she's mostly contained to just her mask and police evidence. But Cassidy is still there trying to end it. Eventually, she would meet with Old Man Consequences. Whoever they are, that's a theory for another day. But they tell her that it's okay to move on. Leave the demon to his demons. Rest your own soul. There is nothing else. And Cassidy allows it. William is basically not a threat anymore. And she may not have fully gotten her vengeance, playing this game with William after all these years, but she chooses to rest, to simply fade away. After all, Charlie is still here. It's sure to work out. And then Fazbear Frights and the epilogues happen. So here we go, my general broad strokes timeline of the entire first phase of FNAF, with a lot of extra details and on-the-spot theorizing thrown in. Let me be clear, when I first started making this theory, it was completely just meant to be a Fredbear Plush theory video. But as I kept working on it, I kept running into problems. As the theorist, you want to come to the right conclusions, but you still want to keep it original and entertaining. If 5 people are trying to solve a mystery, you should expect all of them to come to mostly the same conclusion, but it's a little uninteresting. Boring even. Just like my conclusion of William being the speaker. Many have said this before, so the theory grew and it became more of a Cassidy theory. And it got bigger and bigger because Cassidy ties into everything after the MCI. I had already theorized about the timeline pre-MCI, and I needed to correct some things from my last big theory video. Thus, this became a timeline video. How the Fredbear Plush solved the FNAF timeline. I really appreciate anyone who's watched up to this point, and those who haven't, and I hope you like this theory. All the other theory videos I've referenced throughout the video should be linked in the description below, and once again I want to especially shout out Setziety for their video. If you see this, you had a huge hand in making me believe the whole Glitch Bear William Afton connection. We disagree about Yellow Eyes, but theories. If you like this video and want more, go ahead and like and subscribe. We were actually shockingly close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, which is something that I never thought was even possible. So thank you. But if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. Maybe just share the video around. The main thing is sharing new ideas and perspectives, and now I have a platform where I can do that and talk to you guys about it in the comments. So once again, just thank you so much. Bye everybody.